If someone had told Veronica earlier that she would be working as a flight attendant, she would have laughed in their face. Veronica was an accountant by training. Well, what kind of stewardess? However, if she had been told that she was going to raise 3 children alone, Nika would probably have done the same. When you are young and beautiful, you think, I'm going to be fine. But you can't take it out of your mouth. Veronica is young and pretty. What is 25? It's just a girl. Except the girl was raising 3 children. And when you're a single mom with lots of kids, you have to make unorthodox decisions. Her decision to work as a flight attendant was one of them. Veronica divorced her husband about 8 months ago. The divorce was Daniel's initiative. From time to time, the young woman wondered if he really loved her. No, at first there had been flowers and confessions and languid sighs under the moon. Or was Daniel faking it? Who knows? In any case, he did not hesitate to leave his family for another woman. Veronica took the divorce very badly. But she had no idea that it would be the turning point that would turn her already hard life upside down. The working day passed as usual. Veronica, as usual, was serving the passengers on the plane and suddenly saw her ex-spouse with her lover. They smiled, laughed, and seemed very happy. "Hey, beauties!" Daniel yelled. "Can I have more brandy?" "Annette," Nika said to her partner when she heard the voice of her former lover. The hostesses were serving coffee. "Can you accommodate a couple who occupy seats 16D and E? I don't feel very well." "What is it about?" Annette asked worriedly, looking at her carefully. "You are very pale. Will you serve me like this?" "Yes, of course I will," my partner assured me. "Do you need a pill?" "It's not necessary," said Veronica with a wave of her hand. "I'll sit here for a while and it'll go away." "Well, see for yourself." Annette went to serve the sweet couple. Nika downed a glass of water in one gulp and felt much better. And if it wasn't for the nasty side effect of seeing Daniel already what's-his-name Helga, it would have been even better. He approached the entrance of the room and suddenly heard his ex's voice. The honeymoon must be unforgettable. So they get married and go on their honeymoon. Veronica thought, and completely lost her spirit. But was there something to it? There he was, all freaked out. What a shame. "Well, it's a disaster, isn't it?" said with a giggle the appetite that had returned. "I don't want to have to carry him." But no, he asked for more cognac. "Nika, what's wrong with you?" "No, nothing," he sighed. "Really, nothing." And as much as Veronica tried to convince herself that there was nothing to be sorry about, she was upset. "Nothing," Nika repeated. "That's right, we're working." Veronica left the kitchen and, taking up a position of observation at the entrance to the living room, began to spy on her ex-husband. Annette turned out to be right. Daniel drank too much. Lately he had been drinking in general. But, thank God, that wasn't his problem now. But then why did she feel so tormented? Veronica looked thoughtfully at her ex-boyfriend and, without realizing it, plunged into sad memories. Nika's father, Alejandro, a helicopter pilot, had died in a plane crash when she was 5 years old. Mari, once a happy and loved woman, suddenly became a widow. Veronica will never forget her mother's tear-stained face. But it turned out that his dark streak had only just begun. The succession of misfortunes only increased. For as long as she could remember, Nika had always disliked her paternal grandparents. They treated their granddaughter with a certain coldness. The girl loved them with the naive love that only children are capable of, but as she grew older she began to realize that her grandparents did not reciprocate her feelings. And when Veronica started going through puberty, she distanced herself from them. Awkward and unpleasant. After all, Veronica has her pride, and she wasn't going to beg for love. Nika, of course, more than once wondered what it was about, but never found the answer. The girl did not discover the truth until several years later. One day Mari came home from work early. She was unnaturally pale and was clutching her chest. "Mom, what's wrong with you?" Veronica asked, scared. "My chest hurts," her mother said quietly. "She must have caught a cold. You know there's the flu now." She agreed. "Yes," he said with a sigh. She agreed. "Go to bed. I'll make you a broth and a tea with honey." Mari had never complained about her health. He did not smoke and drank alcohol in microscopic doses. Neither the mother nor the daughter paid much attention to this. The next day the pain got worse. In addition, there was a general intoxication. He understood that it was a serious problem, but he put it down to a common cold. He wondered what kind of complications it could cause. "I'll call an ambulance," Veronica said firmly. Mari was admitted to the hospital. After a detailed analysis, the doctor issued a diagnosis. The woman was diagnosed with cancer. Treatment included more than one cycle of chemotherapy and regular use of pain relievers. Veronica, 18, believed to the end that her mother would be able to cope with this insidious disease. After all, he was still very young. But Mari herself felt that the end was near and that chemotherapy was useless. He only had to accept it and dare to tell her daughter the truth that had completely changed her life. "Nika, there is something I have to tell you," Mari said quietly. The girl looked closely at her mother and noted that she looked much better. "He is recovering?" Veronica thought hopefully. "Well, it has to be, so it has to be," he smiled. "I'm all ears. You're old enough to understand. At least, I hope so. And I want to tell you why your grandfather and grandmother don't like you." To tell the truth, Veronica hasn't been interested in that for a long time. Well, they don't and they don't. His father had been gone for over 10 years and communication with his parents was stagnant. However, the girl felt that she was about to learn something important. Another thing was that his mother had dared to tell him now, being in a hospital bed. "Oh, what if? I didn't even want to think about it. Especially since my mother was clearly better." "And why was that?" asked the girl. "They don't like you because you're not their granddaughter." Veronica groaned, and her mother, ignoring the astonished face she was making, continued. "Your father had already asked me to marry him when I was pregnant." "And he knew?" "I knew it," Mari agreed. "I had no intention of deceiving Alejandro. I was honest about it. I had a fiancé at that time. We were about to get married, but he died in an accident the week before." "And his parents?" "I didn't get along with his family," answered the mother, and added bitterly, "They didn't even let me go to the funeral." Veronica remained silent, digesting what she had heard. "Forgive me, daughter," Mari said quietly, interpreting her silence in her own way. "Very sorry. You have nothing to regret, Mom." He shook his head and squeezed her hand. "It's not your fault. That's life." "Yes, it is life." He thought about how unpredictable he was. If her mother hadn't told her that her father wasn't her real father, Veronica wouldn't have believed it. So where does this love for heaven come from? Mother? Veronica asked the girl suspiciously. Veronica jumped into the hallway and, without realizing it, yelled, "Someone help me!" But Mom was better, sobbed Nika in the doctor's office. It usually happens, he responded sympathetically. A person feels better before dying for a while. It goes without saying that the death of his mother mercilessly divided his life into before and after. The abyss of pain and suffering engulfed Veronica slowly but inexorably. They had no relatives, and the girl did not even want to think about what she would bury her mother with. Thanks to the neighbors, they collected money from the world for the thread. "I'll give it all back," Veronica promised, stirring the sauce for the chops. "As soon as I receive the funeral benefit, I will give it to you." The elderly neighbor Cassandra waved her hand. "We'll fix it. I met her as a child and I can only say good things about her. So it's a sacred thing to help your daughter. You better count how many plates you have. Should I buy more?" Neighbors helped Nika not only with money, but also with the preparation of the memorial dinner, dishes, chairs, and everything necessary for a decent funeral. And then you have to leave her alone with her grief. And of course, move on with your life. Veronica, an orphan, gradually recovers. Life goes on. Living on a paltry stipend is unrealistic, and Veronica immediately began looking for a job. Soon Veronica was lucky. He got a job at a flower shop. The girl really liked being there. And even the fact that Nika was tired after school didn't dampen her enthusiasm for the floral kingdom. Fragrant roses, lilies, orchids, and other flowers always had a beneficial effect on the girl. "I never thought that carnations could be so beautiful," she exclaimed, accepting a lot of luxurious cream-colored carnations. "I always thought they were red and white and, well, pink and not at all festive." "Here you will see more than that," the hostess said proudly. "A bouquet of carnations can also be beautiful and will be suitable not only for one party a year, but also as a gift for the girl you love." Barring a bitter loss, Veronica's life was looking up. Soon a very handsome and sociable guy came to the flower shop. "How can I help you?" he asked with a smile, realizing that the young man couldn't make up his mind. "Well, yes," he agreed. "And who is the bouquet for?" Nika asked. "It's for my mother," he smiled. "Today is his birthday and we would like to have something. I don't know how to say it. Elegant?" suggested the girl. "Oh yeah." The boy was delighted. Elegant, of course. She chose a pretty bouquet of zinnias, decorative sunflowers, and marigolds, complete with berries and strange herbs. After thinking about it for a while, he bought 3 beautiful tea roses and gave them to Veronica. "And this is for you," said the young man gallantly. "Roses, however, far from you, but I hope you like it." "I do," he said with a smile. But it was not necessary to spend so much money. "Oh, yes, it was worth it," objected the stranger. "By the way, my name is Daniel, and you?" "My name's Veronica." "Veronica, Strawberry Veronica," Daniel said, and suddenly the girl's heart was glad. "We'll see each other again." In fact, they did see each other. The handsome client arrived the next day. Daniel sat in the flower shop until the end of the girl's working day. Then he helped Veronica get cleaned up and walked her home. "You work every day?" Daniel asked. "No, I work on a 2x2 schedule." "You won't work on Saturdays, right?" "It turns out that I don't work," smiled Veronica. "Can I take you for a walk?" It turns out that yes, you can, he laughed. That Saturday night was the beginning of their romance. They walked until midnight, and when Daniel walked Nika home, they kissed for the first time. Veronica did not want to be separated from Daniel, but it did not seem appropriate to invite him to her house. They still didn't know each other very well. Daniel did not insist. "Good night, my beauty," he said, pulling her towards him. He kissed her again. Falling asleep, Veronica smiled. Their first night was really romantic. Daniel brought champagne, a bouquet of roses, and showered the love bed with petals. "Now I, as an honest man, must marry you," Daniel said thoughtfully. "You're kidding," he smiled. "I'm serious. Nika, will you marry me?" "I'm going to do it." Ever since the divorce, Veronica had wondered why Daniel needed to get married so quickly. Well, with Nika everything is clear. She was young, naive, inexperienced, and besides, she was very lonely. It was more than enough to make her head spin. It was later that Veronica realized what it was about. He had a place to live and Daniel wanted to move out of his parents' house. Perhaps the marriage proposal had been spontaneous, hormonally influenced. And then there was Nikki's chastity status. So the marriage did not last long, and unfortunately, it was not a very happy one. "Nika, what are you doing standing there?" Annette wondered. "There is a passenger in seat 12E asking for a pail. You see, she's old." "Bring it, please. And I'm going to put sandwiches on plates." "Yes," agreed Veronica distractedly. "What's wrong?" "You've been staring at that drunk for 10 minutes. I wonder if you have fallen in love." "I'm afraid you won't get anywhere there. They're going on their honeymoon." "Do not say foolishness." He took one last look at Daniel and his future wife and went to the bedding, blankets, and quilts department. Once the older woman's wishes were fulfilled, Veronica headed to the living room. There were no urgent matters in sight, so he could lie down for a while. And at the same time he could keep reminiscing. The first brick in the wall of alienation, which suddenly began to grow by leaps and bounds, was Veronica's failed attempts to get pregnant. A year passed and the pregnancy tests were still showing only one strip. Daniel wasn't too upset. "Well, if it didn't work out, maybe it wasn't time yet?" I ask. "You're only 19 years old and I'm not ready to be a father yet. Is it wrong to live for yourself? We go out, we have fun, we go to the field. You won't have any of that with a child." Many families spend wonderful holidays and with small children, Veronica objected. "But you are still in school, Nika," said her husband. "There is nothing to be upset about." But Daniel was right. But when Veronica finished high school, she started talking about having a child again. "Daniel, why don't we take the baby out of the orphanage?" he said one day. "From an orphanage?" her husband asked again, and Nika could tell by the expression on his face that he was not enthusiastic about the idea. "But if you say A, say B," and Veronica continued the conversation. "Well, yes, from the orphanage," she answered. "What is the problem?" "But we don't know who the child's parents are. And if they are criminals?" "Somehow I thought you were going to say that," he sighed. "But surely it all depends on education. And then, well, you could make inquiries." "That's true, but there's something else." "What's that?" "You really don't get it, do you?" Daniel exclaimed. "I don't have a steady job." "So now you have an incentive to find one," Veronica shrugged. "However, she had managed to convince her husband to take the child from the orphanage. It was a boy named Pablo. Veronica knew as soon as she looked at the baby that it was mine. The boy had a small scar on his leg, the shelter director explained, the result of a botched delivery. Nika was delighted. But that couldn't be said by looking at Daniel. Although, it must be admitted, he found a job. Before collecting Vic's adoption papers, the couple contacted Alejandro, a friend of Daniel's. He owned a small plumbing shop, and Alejandro had no problem issuing a certificate stating that the father-to-be supposedly worked for him. By the way, I need a saleswoman, and only one guy. You want to work? Daniel? Veronica looked at him significantly. Why? I could, agreed her husband. But not with much enthusiasm. After putting Pablo to bed, Veronica decided to go eat. But as soon as she put a spoonful of soup in her mouth, she felt a violent nausea. Nika barely made it to the bathroom in time. He didn't feel well for the rest of the day, and Daniel couldn't hide it. Are you sick? Asked her husband. It seems so, agreed Veronica. I felt nauseated and weak. The next day he felt bad and decided to go to the doctor. Congratulations, Mom, said a pretty blonde woman of about 35. You're 6 weeks pregnant. My God, Veronica said in surprise. It's a miracle. I couldn't get pregnant for years. My husband and I even took in a child from the orphanage. Where there is one, there are two, smiled the doctor. Well, go and make your husband happy. Daniel came home from work in a bad mood. She's probably tired, she decided. You have gone to the doctor? Asked her husband. I did it, agreed Veronica. Nothing serious, I hope. I'm not sick, she replied with a mysterious smile. I'm pregnant. I eat? I'm pregnant, she repeated, still smiling with emotion. She had already realized that the news of her pregnancy did not make Daniel happy. Damn it, said her husband and put his arms around her head. This is not good right now. Something has happened? Veronica asked, relieved to think that Daniel's bad mood had nothing to do with her pregnancy. However, as the saying goes, horseradish is not sweet. They fired me, he said. Fired? Nika was surprised. But why? Let's say there was a disagreement with management. But you're a friend of his. Why? Daniel smiled satisfied. Sometimes it just gets in the way. Maybe I should talk to him? Veronica suggested. It just can't be. No, I don't think so. We'll get by with part-time jobs and then we'll see. Listen, Nika, why don't we forget about this pregnancy? Well, now is not the time. I'm not going to give birth right now, said Veronica. No, I've waited a long time, so no way. When Daniel found out that his wife was pregnant with twins, he almost lost his mind. That's all I needed to be happy. Daniel gritted his teeth. No matter how many times they told him that the children were happy, he couldn't be. Well, why should I be happy? A can or two of beer, a packet of chips, and a football game were another matter altogether. In Daniel's opinion, this was a perfect night. Apparently, for him happiness consisted in this. The couple had two adorable girls, Vissy and Tammy. As a father with many children, Daniel was not concerned about having a steady job that would guarantee him a steady income to support his large family. Veronica did what she could. That's where her accounting degree came in handy. Veronica worked with individual entrepreneurs, and the money she earned was enough to lead a fairly comfortable life. He was also fluent in English, and from time to time he looked for opportunities to translate on the internet. Of course, his lack of qualifications didn't allow him to accept big jobs, but he managed to earn some money. And the husband continued to push the sofa, and only occasionally worked as a stevedore or courier. Over time, Veronica began to notice that Daniel distanced himself from her. He became distracted and inconsiderate, his responses to questions vague and one-liners. The young woman felt increasingly uncomfortable with her husband, whom she had once loved with all her heart. Daniel began to show an indifference towards his family that he didn't even think it necessary to hide. It got worse. The father of a large family began to linger at his part-time job. The merchandise arrived late, and while they were unloading it, he said, hiding his eyes. The young mother banished the idea that Daniel might have had a mistress, which led to his estrangement from the family. "I wouldn't be surprised," said neighbor Inga, who stayed with the children when Veronica had to go out on business. "Why?" I ask. "Daniel makes an effort for the family, works part-time, but can't get a steady job." Nika had an epiphany when her husband told her that he had filed for divorce and was leaving her for another woman. "But why?" she muttered, exasperated. "Well, what have I been doing wrong? Maybe it's not too late to fix it?" "Really? You wanted a baby, and you wouldn't let me go until we had an orphan girl. Now you have disappeared into children. But have you ever asked me what I want? That is. End of comedy. I fell in love with someone else. But leaving her for another woman was half the problem. When Daniel left his family, he not only stopped helping his children, but also took most of the money he had saved at home with him. When going out shopping a couple of days after her husband left, Veronica discovered that she had no money and burst into tears. "Why are we crying?" Inga asked. The neighbor had come to take care of the children, as usual. "The purchase. It's over," sobbed Veronica. "No money. At all. Daniel has it all." "Surprised," said her neighbor, with a giggle. "He was a consumer, he will continue to be. And I will lend you the money." "That's not fair." Veronica did not stop sobbing. "I beg you. Where is justice, and where is this misunderstanding of the supposed male sex?" At night, when the children were sleeping, the mother of many children was taking a bath. She stared thoughtfully at the crack in the tile, and suddenly it dawned on her. I couldn't change the situation for the better, nor could I glue that piece of tile so that the crack couldn't be seen. But his attitude towards her, on the other hand, could. Looking at the situation from another angle, Veronica concludes that it is an incentive to act decisively. After all, she had 3 small children that no one else could take care of. So it was vital that she put her feelings aside and start looking for a job. "I'll start tomorrow," she decided, drying herself with a fluffy towel. It would be better in the morning. After drying her hair, Veronica went to bed. "I dreamed that I worked as a stewardess." When she woke up, Nika knew what she was going to do. Now, months after their divorce, Veronica thought that she had had that dream for a reason. A prophetic dream? Probably. And it was so that Veronica could remember the dream of her life. It was, he decided when he finally woke up. The children were still sleeping. Veronica washed her face, had breakfast, and began to search the internet for cheap flight attendant courses and, if possible, not too long. Luckily, there were some. Advanced English courses lasted longer and therefore cost more, but Veronica didn't need them. He spoke excellent English. After graduation, there were no problems with employment. A pretty girl with knowledge of English was very welcome. There was a long waiting list for daycare, but Alice was happy to take care of the children. And when Veronica talked about money, her neighbor was offended. Inga's husband earned a lot of money and she worked remotely. If the neighbor had a business of her own, the young mother went to a babysitting agency that worked by the hour. Veronica was delighted with the agency she chose. The fact was that you could choose a candidate in a price range that suited you. Therefore, the services of a nanny were not too expensive. This was how they lived. And lo! A hubby with his own lady-in-waiting. Not just any bride, but a newly married wife. Veronica decided that there was nothing special about the ex-husband's girlfriend. A silicone blonde wherever she could find her, and there was plenty. Such a comparison amused her, and suddenly Nika realized that she did not care who Daniel lived with or what he breathed. A psychologist would deduce that, by mentally reliving the period in which they had been together, the young woman had thus left the past behind. To hell with him, he thought happily. After the plane landed in the southern city, Veronica took care of the couple and thought that God himself had taken her away from that idiot. Let that silicone doll pamper him. The sea, the beach, said Annette dreamily. Look, Nika, the flight is 7 hours away, and we are not busy yet. Do you see where I want to go? Of course, Veronica said, chuckling. How about? I think we can afford to sunbathe and bathe for an hour and a half, don't you think? I'm agree, said. After the beach and a light dinner, the stewardesses began to clean the cabin. The departure time was 2.5 hours. Suddenly, in the place where the sweet couple was sitting, Veronica noticed a flash drive. It seems that they have dropped it, he smiled to himself. You should drink less. Veronica put the flash drive in the pocket of her uniform jacket, thinking that she would check it at home. But curiosity got the better of her and they finished cleaning earlier than expected. Do you know if there is an internet cafe around here by chance? He asked the crew members as they all sat down to enjoy the exotic fruits bought in a hoarding from the local market. I think there is one in the airport building, the navigator frowned. I won't be long. Nika blurted out and stormed out of the car. When turning on the computer, Veronica's jaw dropped. On the flash drive were the codes and passwords of the safe deposit boxes of a certain wealthy man. The account holder's phone number was attached. Veronica had doubts. Wouldn't contacting the owner put her in the middle of an ugly story? Well, where did Daniel get the money for such an expensive honeymoon? He never liked working, and then there was that flash drive. Still, Veronica called. Hello, answered a pleasant baritone. Hello, squeaked. I don't know your name, told me. When Veronica explained the situation to her, the man, who introduced himself as Jacques, told her that he would meet her in the city. A nice man was waiting for Nika when she returned. They walked to an airport restaurant. When Jacques' cell phone rang, he said something about the exchange rate and an agreement with the Americans. Probably a successful businessman, thought the young woman. After disconnecting, the man apologized, offered to place an order, and only then began to talk about the case. The couple you described were renovating my flat, said, but apparently they were interested in the keys and codes of my accounts. They must have an accomplice. Hacking a computer is easy, but I don't think they did it on their own. He's not smart enough. Yes, Veronica thought. Daniel is not exactly an intellectual, and the silicone blonde is certainly not overly intelligent. I don't know how to thank you, Veronica. Jacques continued. Oh, no, he was embarrassed. I'm not here to thank you. The man smiled and shook his head. You're extraordinary. Your husband must adore you. I'm divorced, answered Veronica, and couldn't help but laugh. And my husband was the gentleman who made the repairs. Yes, Jacques smiled happily. What can not happen in the world? No, don't think I'm not here to annoy you, the young woman hastened to add. I couldn't imagine that Daniel was renovating your house. He moves more. Ahem. A stevedore and a stewardess. It is a curious combination. Then I wasn't a stewardess, Veronica sighed, but this time she managed to shake off the unhappy memory. Dead is dead, as they say. But we have to get on with our lives. He has children? Asked the businessman. They do, she agreed with a smile. I am a happy mother of 3 children. Really? The man exclaimed in surprise. I never would have guessed. You are so young, beautiful, slender. And in your definition of a mother of 3, is she a fat and ugly old woman? Nika laughed. Well. The businessman was clearly embarrassed, which amused her. It turns out that even such important gentlemen know how to make a fool of themselves. It's just that in our circle, women hardly dare make one, she said. Fear of spoiling her figure. In your circle? Veronica frowned, and the man realized that it had been a lack of tact. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. No, you didn't. Not seriously. I do not live in the forest, Nika said, and smiled suddenly and slyly. By the way, I've only had 1 baby. Why? Czech asked perplexed, but then he thought better of it and agreed. So you have triplets? Twins, he replied, still smiling slyly, but continuing to explain. We adopted the eldest son, and later I got pregnant. Now the businessman was looking at Veronica with undisguised admiration. Suddenly, he proposed to take the children to the amusement park. Amusement rides? Nika asked in astonishment. With you? Yes, agreed Jacques. I would like to thank you. So I invite you. As a token of my gratitude. This is the matter, Veronica. My driver will arrive at any moment. We have each other's contacts, what about your schedule? Today I take the day off. 3 days. Well, that's great. Is it okay with you if I call you at 11? Comfortable, Veronica assured me. I get up early. You can't sleep long with a baby like that. You must be tired, right? Asked the businessman sympathetically. I'm used to it, he shrugged. After the successful deal, Jacques Malik drove home and thought about the beautiful stewardess. Looking at her, you can't help but believe that there are still decent beauties out there. It's reassuring. And recently this rich and successful man was convinced that a beautiful woman by definition cannot be decent. Experience, what can be done? He met his wife, Malaysia Malik, at an exhibition of a fashionable young artist. He has always been interested in art, and occasionally promotes young talent. Unless, of course, the talent was promising. The artist was undoubtedly very talented and Jacques invested a lot of money in the exhibition without blinking an eye. He walked from painting to painting and heard people admiring the works, and some of them came up to the gallery owner to ask for the price of the paintings. Malik was in high spirits and expected to make a huge profit. It was then that he saw her. She was wearing a simple black dress, with no hint of cleavage, just below the knees, and patent leather heels. The only jewelry she wore was a pearl necklace. But even such a severe outfit did not hide her vivid beauty. Her long blonde hair gave off a healthy glow, her beautiful blue eyes were like sapphires, and it was impossible to look away from those full, sensual lips. And without makeup. Missing out on such beauty would be a crime, and Jacques resolutely approached her. "You are interested in art?" he asked with a smile. "I am," he answered, smiling dazzlingly. "Like me?" Then there was an invitation to a restaurant and a walk until the morning. The relationship was developing rapidly, and Jacques didn't realize how he proposed to Malicia. She was very smart, her relatives said, but it was as if the lover did not hear anything. And after the wedding, Malicia changed dramatically. At Jacques' invitation to go to the theater or a museum, she limited herself to snorting. Malicia's favorite pastime was shopping, restaurants, and beauty salons. Where had his interest in art gone? "Do not be silly," Jacques' sister once said. "He doesn't care about your art. And the trick is as old as the world." "What trick?" "I didn't understand." "It's like that. The lady goes to the place where the rich people are and pretends to be a lioness. And there are those who do it, and you are an example." Although the truth was evident, Jacques did not want to believe it. He had repeatedly spoken of the child, but Malicia had only shrugged. He said it wasn't time yet. When she got pregnant, Jacques was as happy as a child. Malicia and her newborn son were received in 3 carriages from the maternity hospital. There was a sea of flowers and intricate balloons, but the young mother just smiled miserably. Malicia fell into a postpartum depression. The birth was not easy, and her husband supported her as best he could. But Malicia was constantly finding excuses to lash out at him and the poor baby. He shouted, "Did you want a baby? You already have it. What do you want from me now?" "Like what?" Jacques was surprised. "I want you to remember that you are a mother." "I don't want a baby," Malicia blurted out. "I do not." But even then she chalked it up to postpartum depression. Jacques hired a babysitter to make his wife feel better. And then she went back to shopping, to spas, and hanging out with her friends. When I would come home from work, I would smell more and more of alcohol. "Are you crazy? You have a little boy." "And the baby has a babysitter," replied Malicia. "Do you have everything?" Then I went to bed. And one day Jacques went on a business trip. No, too painful." Malik even shook her head, as if to banish the painful memories. The businessman's thoughts returned to Veronica. So beautiful and pure. Although it seemed like not that long ago, he had also seen her like this. Malik sighed. "Hey women! The days when they were rightly considered the fairer sex were long gone. Once a woman had been the epitome of sweetness, purity, goodness. Now everything is different. And it was a shame." And yet, Jacques didn't want to believe that the slender, brown-eyed beauty was a vixen. Something told me, no, I wouldn't. At least, according to probability theory. And then how could a doting mother of 3 turn into a vulgar slut? Hardly. Malik found herself suddenly thinking that she was looking forward to meeting Veronica. Jacques and Veronica had called and agreed that he would pick them up. "You are precious," the businessman smiled. "Thank you," the young woman replied, embarrassed. She was wearing a light blue dress and white ballerinas. Yesterday Jacques had seen Veronica in her uniform, but today her thick brown hair fell to her shoulders. Light makeup, consisting of pale pink glosses and mascara, accentuated the freshness of her skin. "You are welcome," said Czech, without taking his eyes off her. "It is not a compliment, but a confirmation." "Is there a difference?" asked Nika slyly, and the businessman thought, he knows how to flirt. "Be careful, Malik, don't fall in love." "But it seems too late for that." "I assure you that there is," he assured him. "Better introduce me to your children." "This is Vic baby," introduced Veronica to her son with a smile. "I'm not Vic baby, I'm Vic," the boy said, holding out his wet hand to Jacques. "Check," Malik nodded, shaking the boy's hand. "And these are my beauties," said Veronica. "Yes, I see. As pretty as her mother. We're leaving now?" When they got out of the car, the baby's sandal came untied. Veronica sat the boy on the bench and Jacques observed a small scar on the boy's foot. "It just can't be," he blurted out involuntarily. "Did you just say something?" asked Nika, worried about her son. "Veronica, perhaps it is a bad moment," Czech said quietly, "but can you tell me how Vic got that scar?" Nika was a bit surprised by the question, but quickly realized that it had been asked for a reason. The businessman did not give the impression that he was asking these questions out of idle curiosity. "As the director of the orphanage explained to me, it was a birth trauma," Veronica replied. "The doctors accidentally caused it." "Excuse me, why do you ask?" "I could be wrong, but..." "Well, let's entertain the children before we sit down to talk." The children were put on the merry-go-round and sat on the bench. The young mother saw that Malik was agitated and did not rush him. And yet he managed to pull himself together. "Veronica, as I told you, I can be wrong, but I'm almost sure that my son," said Czech at the same time. "Really?" Veronica groaned. "But how is it possible? Do you want to ask how the child ended up in the orphanage?" Malik smiled without grace. "Good. I doubt dash. Yeah." When Jacques left on that unfortunate business trip, Malaysia decided to have a good time. So the nanny, her mother, had been taken to the hospital, and she had to go out. "It will only take an hour, nothing more," he told Malaysia. "Can you manage here without me?" The landlady was clearly not amused, but she let the nanny go anyway. "I don't know what was going through Malaysia's head," said Czech bitterly, but decided to take a ride in the car with the child. The nurse, of course, excused herself by saying that she had been gone less than an hour and that such a thing had never occurred to her. But that didn't make it any easier. Veronica listened attentively, and the businessman took a breath and continued with the sad story. And then Malaysia drowned in the river. He fell into the river in his car. She was drunk. Gabia said that she was sober that day. Apparently, he got drunk on the way. And they never found their son. I didn't know what to think. The rescuers assumed that it had been swept away by the current. So are the things. But it seems that Vi was found by homeless people and they took him to a shelter. They are always around. Veronica was stunned. Jesus, what kind of mother is that? She thought, horrified. You know, Veronica, oh, I'm sorry, is it okay that it's not you? Malik came to. It's okay, it's okay. God himself sent you to me, he answered and stared at Nika. I like you a lot too. Check. I'm sorry, I'm used to saying what I think, he said, thinking at the same time, everything happened so fast with Malaysia too, I didn't realize what I had called her. Jesus, can we stop comparing? Apart from this heavy conversation, they had a wonderful time. Jacques reproached himself for having left Veronica speechless with his confession, but she was calm. Does he really not care? Thought the businessman sadly. Although, what did he want? After all, we hardly know each other. On the way home, the merry trio dozed in the back seat, exhausted from the experience. When they arrived at Veronica's house, Jacques commented, "It's a shame to wake them up." "It is a pity," assented the young woman with a tired smile. "But we have to." "I don't want to part with the boy," she sighed. "I haven't seen him for almost 4 years. Is that really a problem?" Veronica said, surprised. "You can visit it whenever you want." Jacques looked into her eyes and asked something else. "Really?" "Well, of course. For starters, you can help me carry him to the floor. After all, I can't carry 3 by myself." "Hey, they sleep so sweetly." "But they are more comfortable at home." Veronica laughed softly. "It's true." Jacques gently took his son in his arms. The girls were awake, which made things easier for Nika. When they entered the flat, she suddenly had the feeling that they were family. "You are dreaming," the young woman scolded herself. "You have a mouth." However, the feeling was realistic and Veronica couldn't help it. Also, Jacques said he liked it. Nonsense, Veronica thought. Who knows who likes who? After all, he did not say that he liked it. Sympathy is not love. But it didn't even occur to him that Malik thought the same. That memorable day, Jacques put his son to bed and looked at him for a long time. And so he, politely declining Veronica's offer of tea, went home. And the next day Malik took the baby to the lab and they did a DNA test, which came back positive. Despite his busy schedule, the businessman found time to see his son. She found a good private nursery and paid in advance for the 3 of them to stay for 2 months. When Nika went on a trip, Inga would pick up the children. If Jacques had time, he was content to do it himself. Malik no longer told Veronica that he liked her. All for the good, thought the young mother. Where is he and where am I? Or maybe I was just dreaming. So 3 weeks passed. One day, arriving from the airport after another flight, Veronica found a summons in the mailbox. She hurried into the apartment and impatiently opened the envelope. Veronica had been summoned before the court as a witness. To be honest, she didn't even immediately know which court she was talking about. But when he did, he thought, I hope Daniel and his silicone doll get what they deserve. Nika poured herself a cup of tea, sat down at the table and began to think. And there was a lot to think about. For a week, Jacques had been looking at her strangely. It was the way lovers often look at each other. However, Veronica did not feel comfortable. He wondered if it was just an illusion. Wishes? Exact. Why lie? Veronica was horrified to realize that she had fallen in love with Malik and was careful to keep her feelings to herself. He would think that she wanted to marry him for mercantile reasons. Meanwhile, Malik sat in her office and pondered the situation. He wanted to bring up his son and that was out of the question. Yes, but there was also an amazing girl, Veronica. She had already been raising their son for 4 years, and separating them would be cruel. But there was a way out. Why not have a fake marriage? But Jacques almost threw up thinking about it. He didn't recognize surrogates or sham marriages. Everything seemed wrong to Malik. Of course, as many people as situations, but that's how it was set up, I wanted everything or nothing. The same was the case with visits to his son. Who am I kidding? Jacques thought irritably. Just say that you've fallen in love, but you're afraid that this time it won't be you who you want, but your money. There was one more nuance. The businessman had never told his family that his son was alive and lived with a divorced woman. After all, it would be a good start to dot the I's. Where to start? And this summons. Deciding that she would settle everything after the trial, Malik folded her papers on her desk, turned off her computer, and went home. Unfortunately, today he has not been to see his son. Jacques stayed working until almost 10 at night and didn't want to disturb Nick at such a late hour. For the remaining 5 days before the trial, Malik visited Vic every day. The girls had grown fond of him too, and the situation was becoming unmistakable. However, nothing had changed in the relationship between the businessman and the woman who had raised his son. The day before the trial, they had agreed that Jacques would pick up Veronica, and he did. So now they sat down in court and rejoiced. Justice had been served. Daniel and his wife were found guilty of fraud and sentenced to 8 years in prison each. As they were led away, Daniel looked at his ex-wife with unspeakable hatred. This did not move Veronica. He only pointed out that Daniel was going to have a hard time in jail. Nika, Jacques suggested when they left the court. Why don't we celebrate our victory in a cozy restaurant? Well, he hesitated. Nothing good, the businessman firmly objected and winked. I'm going out. It's okay, Veronica River. I laughed. Well, Veronica laughed. Well, said. Luckily Daniel and his wife got what they deserved, Nika said, sipping the delicious champagne. Forget about them, said Malik. Let's talk about us. About us? About us, Nika, he nodded. We are adults and I can no longer pretend that nothing happens. There's Vic, my own son, and I think it's okay that I want to live with him. That's all, Veronica thought with disappointment. You deserve it, idiot. You shouldn't dream. That's what the restaurant was for. She exclaimed angrily. To persuade me. I did not expect. Veronica wanted to get up from the table, but was suddenly surprised to notice that Jacques was shaking with laughter. He must have made a fool of himself, because a few seconds later the businessman was already laughing out loud. Did I say something funny? I do not think so. May God help you, said Malik laughing. He laughed in relief. No, this woman was not like his late wife and the others who hung on him for money. If Nika had been like them, she would have proposed a deal, demanded money for the 4 years, hinted at marriage eventually. But apparently none of the above had occurred to him. Aren't you playing me? The thought flashed, but now Jacques was sure that it was not so. I'm sorry if I offended you, but I wanted to suggest that you all move in with me. He said very seriously. I once said I liked you. I lied. I fell in love with you like a boy in the airport cafeteria. I also want you to be my wife. Veronica, will you marry me? Yes, agreed with a smile. Now you have made me the happiest man in the world, Malik said, kissing his hand. And Veronica smiled and thought that the story with the flash drive was nothing more than a gift from fate, which knows who, where and when to gather. And if they'd met in the winter, Jacques wouldn't have seen the scar on Vic's leg. Now the young woman was convinced, there were no coincidences. Little did he know, however, that restless fate had something more in store for him. In the afternoon, the newlyweds went to a jewelry store, where Jacques bought Veronica a ring with a ruby framed in diamonds. The next day, she and the children moved in with Malik. At first, the businessman's relatives distrusted Veronica. But when she told them who had been raising the child all this time, they changed their minds about her. "And you shut up?" Jacques scrambled his hands. "My grandson is alive and well, and you kept quiet?" "I didn't know how to say it," he answered. "After all, there is not only us, but the woman who raised him." "Well, and the situation itself?" "Well, what can I say now? The main thing is that the child is fine. God must have sent this to you, Veronica. But are you happy?" "I've never been so happy." "Good, thanks God." On the occasion of their upcoming wedding, the young couple decided to hold an engagement party. They decided to invite only their relatives. "Nika, I present to you Hugo, my partner and godfather." Czech introduced an interesting man in his 50s. "He taught me everything I know." "So he did it," said Hugo Damble cheerfully. "You also have a mustache. What is the name of the beautiful one?" "Veronica," he smiled. There was a noticeable scar on the man's temple. "An old wound," he explained, drawing Nikki's attention. "I had a car accident. But, you know, they say it looks good on me." "I suppose so," agreed the young woman. "Scars make a man look good." El Padrino Jacques made a great impression. So did the rest of his family. And she, the fool, had been afraid she wouldn't be welcome. The engagement celebrations continued. Suddenly, Veronica realized that Hugo was staring at her. There was no masculine interest in his gaze. Czech's godfather was more likely to recognize someone in her. "Probably he flew on the plane and remembered me," decided Veronica. However, the version did not seem too convincing to him. Nika had already stopped paying attention to her when suddenly she saw Mr. Damble walking towards her. "Veronica, I don't want to intrude, but could you tell me your last name?" I ask. "My first husband's name is Kalsko and my maiden name is Wasko," she answered, slightly surprised, and thought to herself, "No, he's not a passenger. Besides, the man with the scar would definitely remember him." "Wasko," said Hugo. "Do you happen to know Mari Wasko?" "Excuse me, but she has a striking resemblance to her. You could also photograph her." "Mari Wasko is my mother," Nika whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "She was." "Was?" "Yes," he agreed. 7 years ago I buried my mother." "Jif died? I cannot believe it. What happened to it?" "Mom had cancer." "But how did you meet her?" "JYF was my first love," answered Damble with a sad smile. "We were going to get married, and JYF was pregnant with me." "In all probability." You must be confused." Veronica shook her head. "Before she died, my mother told me that her fiancé had died in an accident." "If you are 25 now, you are definitely my daughter. Although, of course, we can take a DNA test. Just to be sure." "I really am 25 years old," answered the young woman in amazement. "But Mom said." Nikki's nose tingled and she was afraid she would cry. But Damble understood what he meant. "Your mother was tricked," she sighed. "I survived that accident, but I spent 3 years in a coma. The doctors insisted on incapacitating me, but my relatives waited until the end. When I woke up, my parents told me that JYF had left me and married someone else. That's why Mom wasn't allowed to go to the funeral." "Correct. Because there was no funeral." The orphan girlfriend didn't suit them, Hugo said guiltily. The DNA test came back positive. This is how Veronica found her feminine happiness and her father. Jacques found a wife and a son. It was like a miracle. A sleek, dark cherry-colored Porsche pulled up at the cemetery gate. Two men and a young woman got out of the car. "Well, hello, Mom," Veronica said. Approaching the monument, he placed a beautiful bouquet of flowers on the grave and, caressing the photograph, said, "And I'm not alone, but with your future son-in-law. We are getting married tomorrow. And I'll surely be happy for both of you." "Well, for my part, I promise you that our daughter will be happier than us," Hugo murmured. "That's life, huh? I will definitely take care of Nick and our grandchildren." They were silent, physically feeling the presence of the woman who was looking at them from the photograph. "Your mother was very pretty," Jacques said quietly, squeezing the bride against his shoulder. "And surely as bright and kind as you." As they drove towards the city, they each thought about how intertwined their fates were. And how great it was that they were intertwined. The wedding was beautiful and massive. The wedding ceremony and banquet were held in the courtyard of the Jacques mansion. Veronica, in an off-the-shoulder white dress and long veil, looked incredibly feminine. Emma and Tanya, in their matching lace dresses, looked like fairy tale princesses. The girls strutted around holding the edges of their mother bride's veil. An arch of balloons billowed above the table, near which a secretary waited for them. Vi, dressed in a page suit, who also accompanied the bride and groom to the wedding, looked no less impressive. There was nothing to say about the groom. Sheikh Malik looked 10 years younger. In his light gray suit, he looked imposing. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The attractive blonde finished her speech. "Congratulations," clinking glasses, and the obligatory bitter. The scent of flowers, love, and happiness was in the air. The honeymoon in the Maldives was unforgettable, but the family was waiting at home. And business does not tolerate prolonged absences from the helmsman. As soon as they set foot on their homeland, tan and handsome, bored children ran up to them. "Mom, Dad." The little ones yelled at each other. The girl smiling and her sister and husband followed them. "How was the break?" asked my sister. "We had a good time," said the couple at the same time, and Jacques added, "But it was better at home." 3 months passed. When Jacques suggested that Veronica quit her job, she flatly refused. Jacques wanted to be financially independent and her husband respected her decision. Also, not every rich man can boast of a self-sufficient wife. From work, only in maternity Veronica liked to repeat, "Do you plan to have more children?" The women became friends. They often took their children with them and occasionally went out together. Now they were sitting on a lounger by the pool in one of the fancy gyms. Of course, the surprised daughter-in-law responded, "Children are happiness." Diane herself was the mother of 2 children, and I was totally on board with her. And Nika added, "And then, I want to have a baby with the man I love." "It's a good wish," said her husband's sister. "When are you going to make it come true?" "In 7.5 months it will come true," smiled Veronica. "How exciting. Does Tomasz know?" "No," he shook his head. "I want to give him the news on his birthday." "You are good," said Den, looking thoughtfully at her daughter-in-law. "Sometimes I wonder why he didn't meet you in the first place." "Yes," Nika sighed, remembering her bad marriage. "But thank God we met, and let's hope that our happiness lasts." 3 days later, Malik celebrated Jacques' birthday. And when the couple, after saying goodbye to their guests, was left alone, Veronica said, "The surprises for your birthday do not end here. I have a private gift for you." "Sounds intriguing," he smiled. "Would you like to do a candid dance for me?" "Better," replied his wife cryptically. "I'll dance, okay. After all, I'll soon feel uncomfortable doing it." "Why?" "Because my stomach will get in the way." "Stomach?" Jack asked, perplexed, but upon reflection he exclaimed, "So, it's great." He jumped up, picked up his young wife, and began to spin it. "That's not all," Veronica said. Jack stopped. "What else?" "You'd better sit down," she giggled. "You'd better sit down or you'll drop me." "Go, go," said the intrigued husband, and without letting go of Nika's arms, he sat down. "We're going to have twins," she whispered, and with a smile she raised her hands. "I can't give birth one by one." "Good for you," Jacques whispered, tenderly kissing his wife. "Children. It's great. We'll upload them." The twins were born on a clear and sunny day in July, in the middle of Jacques' working day. He had barely signed the contract with the smiling and friendly Armenians when his mobile phone rang. After talking with his wife, the happy father beamed with happiness. "So guys, I won't let you go without cognac," he exclaimed. "My children have been born. Twins." "Children, that's great." The Caucasians agreed. Of course, I couldn't help but toast to it. After dismissing the partners, Malik must have thought for the 1000th time how lucky he and Nika had been to meet. It was the flash drive lost by criminals. If you liked the story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel.